Turns out someone tapped the tainted water supply.
We are looking at Week 3, Chapter 3, Prejudice and Discrimination, the Tools of Dominance. Prejudice, and that is the generalized ideas towards someone or a group of people, whether it be good or bad. So it doesn't always have to be bad. For example, as I've used in the past, terrible example, but if we see Little Red Riding Hood, okay, so if we see some little blonde girl carrying a picnic basket, I'm not going to assume that it's an AK-47 in there. I'm thinking might be cookies. I might get a treat. I'm not going to have negative ideas towards a little blonde girl with a picnic basket skipping towards me. Again, prejudice can be one way or another. It can be good or bad. Next is discrimination, and this is when someone or a group of people act upon these prejudiced thoughts and ideas. Discrimination can take the form of verbal abuse, denial of resources, physical attack, and, as history will show, flat-out genocide. Mass media can play a role in this. We are bombarded with racially charged imagery that becomes normalized over time. Things like Speedy Gonzales, how we'll see in like 50s TV shows how the housemaid was always Latino or African American, one of these minority groups to some white family, basically in suburbia.
Why, it's Clifton, our colored milkman.
And it's my favorite family to deliver milk to.
I have a lunch meeting at Hubert's in 20 minutes with Ronald Harrison, and I need those sheets cleaned by this afternoon. Listen, I cannot understand you. This is crazy. You're a fool. I can't cope with this.
Another key term is micro-discrimination. This occurs on a personal one-on-one level, like when a shop owner refuses service to a customer. Macro, as you can imagine, on a larger scale, occurs on a large scale, like with things like Jim Crow laws or explicit blatant segregation laws. And third on the list is structural, which this one's a bit tricky because it doesn't use overt racism like segregation laws in the 50s did. These are embedded into policies that inadvertently target minority groups, like denying home loans to people with sub 800 credit scores, which affects minority groups as the majority of people who are affected by that, or even predatory loans that are targeted towards minority groups that qualify for these things because the qualification parameters are just so forgiving that unknowing minority groups sign up for these things and they end up being, in crippling debt basically as a result. And these loan sharks basically profit off of these incredibly high interest rates. And then when they try to take it to small claims court or they have to file bankruptcy and they point fingers at them for their practices, well, they can basically get off by saying, well, we're an equal opportunity lender and, technically they didn't have to take the loan. They set up shop in these neighborhoods that are designed and targeted towards minority groups. We learn that prejudice and discrimination can be taught via our upbringing and social context that either condemns or condones it. It's handed down from generation to generation. Reference groups. The in-group is compared to the out-group. So we see this a lot of time with sports teams. 49ers versus Seahawks or whoever. So say you live in the Northwest. Well, more than likely you're probably going to be a Seahawks fan. But your friend who lives down in the Bay Area, more than likely is going to be a 49ers fan. So the Seahawks would be your in-group, and your friend and the 49ers, they would be your out-group to compare. You can compare them in so many various different ways. Fantasy league and rushing yards and all sorts of other stats. Politically, we've got the classic Trump versus Biden as of right now. Cars, Chevy versus Ford. And the battle of the century is the battle of the Ryans. Gosling versus Reynolds.
Here at Ryan Gosling's acting range, you can learn how to play all sorts of fellas. From gangster squatters to boxers, to drivers, to driving boxers. Guys from Brooklyn, guys from New York, guys from Williamsburg, from uptown, downtown, anyone from New York, and hipster boys. I never had a daddy.
What?
Which one's more attractive? These in-groups and out-groups can change over time. Young versus old. When you're a teenager and you hate old retired people, guess what? You're going to get old and become an old retired person yourself. And then next thing you know, you're going to be shaking your fist with your walker and cane being dadgum kids.
You just can't wait for me to die, can you?
They're selling chocolate.
Chocolate?
Yeah.
What? What are they selling?
Chocolate.
What?
Chocolate.
I can't hear you.
They're selling chocolate.
They're selling chocolate?
Yeah.
Chocolate. I remember when they first invented chocolate. Sweet, sweet chocolate. I always hated it.
So, in-groups, out-groups, they change. We've got Merton's paradigm, which the first category is what's called the active bigot. This is someone who has prejudice and discriminates. So they think bad things, they think negative things, and they do bad, negative things towards people that are not like them. The fair-weather liberal has no prejudice but performs discriminatory acts. So this just might be some office worker who they don't have any prejudice towards this person that they're denying a home loan or something like that. But again, orders from higher up in the chain of command dictate that they say no and reject this person's loan application. The third is the timid bigot, where this is someone who has prejudice thoughts but is too afraid to act. So this is the shop owner that really hates this one type of person that comes into their shop, but because they need the money and they pay rent, they bite their tongue and they make the person a hamburger or something like that, or they sell them clothing, or they sell them ice cream. And lastly is the all-weather liberal. Seeing as how we're on the topic of how prejudice and discrimination can be used as a tool, we've seen this with politicians, how they use prejudice to prey on people's fears, to make them think a certain way. For example, how George W. Bush criticized his opponent at the time, which was a Michael Dukakis.
But I want to be a president of the United States who makes sure that we never again do business with a drug-running Panamanian dictator, that we never again funnel aid to the Contras who convicted drug dealers. Values begin at the top. Those are the values I want to bring to the presidency and to the White House beginning in January of 1989.
Panama is a friendly country.
Tell him, George.
I went down there and talked to the president of Panama about cleaning up their money laundering.
George Bush criticized Dukakis for being soft on crime and saying that he would allow people like Willie Horton to be loose on the streets and to rape and kill again, basically.
Bush and Dukakis on crime. Bush supports the death penalty for first-degree murderers. Dukakis not only opposes the death penalty, he allowed first-degree murderers to have weekend passes from prison. One was Willie Horton, who murdered a boy in a robbery, stabbing him 19 times. Despite a life sentence, Horton received 10 weekend passes from prison. Horton fled, kidnapped a young couple, stabbing the man and repeatedly raping his girlfriend. Weekend prison passes. Dukakis on crime.
This preyed on white people's fears of black violent criminals being loose on the streets. So you can just imagine Gertrude shaking, ooh, like hiding in her little home in front of her little television set with the little 2 antennas sticking off the top. Ooh, scary, he's coming to a neighborhood near me. Can't have that. So I'm going to vote for George W. Bush. And lastly, during our recent presidential debates, the hot topic issue resulted in the question of Trump being asked, Mr. President, do you or do you not condemn white supremacy? You've seen the memes by now. Stand down, stand by. You see how these things can be brought up in the public sphere and used to advocate for your campaign or to basically mudsling against the other guy.
Yeah, dude.
Pork chop sandwiches.
Do not touch the rubbish.